There we are. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today. For whoever who sees the videos while we're live or the videos after, I am Jessie. Once again, you guys should be a bit more familiar with me, but today I'm accompanied by Ashton. Ashton, if you'd like to introduce yourself and a little bit about what you do at SARC.
Hi, everybody. My name's Ashton. I'm the child advocate at SARC. Basically, my role is to provide services to children and their families that come through our agency. So I help out kids and I help out their families and try and process different experiences of sexual abuse or sexual assault, and also provide some education to families and kids in the community.
Yay, awesome. Thank you, Ashton. So today we're going to have a quick gender and sexuality 101 course. We're going to be talking about the gender unicorn. For those that saw the earlier pre-recording, there were some links in there. I'm going to try and add some links to this one afterwards for the gender unicorn if anybody is interested in that. So I'm going to try and screen share today and we'll see how that goes. But once I screen share, Ashton is going to go over some of the stuff in the gender unicorn and explain some of the differences between them. So let's see if I can do this correctly. There we go. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Am I sharing it? Okay, cool. So this is what the gender unicorn looks like. Ashton, can you explain a little bit more about the gender unicorn and the idea behind it if you're familiar with it?
Sure. So I actually use this a lot when I'm talking about sex and sexuality, when I'm talking with families or when I'm talking with kids. So this is a really great tool that was developed by the transstudent.org website. So a lot of people use that website as a means to get educational information about the LGBTQ community. It has a lot of really great resources, this being one of them. So the gender unicorn helps to break down gender as well as sexual orientation, as well as like sex. So what you see up at the top, we're talking about gender identity and gender expression. So there's a difference between the two. A lot of people don't really recognize that or understand that. So this kind of helps break that down a little bit, which is really nice. When we're talking about gender identity, we're talking about what's on the inside, kind of the thoughts or the feelings that we have about our gender as it pertains to what is inside versus what's physically outside, right? So when we're talking about gender identity, what I really like about the gender unicorn and what it does is that it's not competing. So you see things like female, woman, or feminine as far as girl, and then you have man, boy, and then other genders, which is really nice because a lot of people think that when you have more masculine identities or identify with more masculine things, then you can't be feminine or there can't be femininity in that. So what the gender unicorn does is it kind of strays away from that, and it says we don't have to compete, right?
Yeah.
The two can coexist, and they can exist simultaneously or harmoniously. It doesn't have to be something that's a battle. So when we're talking about gender identity, we're talking about what's on the inside, right? Those thoughts, those feelings that are inside. When we're talking about gender expression, it's kind of how we present ourselves to the world. A lot of times in the way that we dress or the things that we do, kind of what we portray to others, which is what gender expression is. And you can kind of see on the gender unicorn, there are different emoticons or emojis that kind of correspond to each section. And the gender unicorn kind of lays it out. So for gender identity, there's a little rainbow in the thought bubble, kind of help people to visualize what it's describing. So when we're talking about gender expression, we're talking about the whole expression of the unicorn. So it's kind of those little dots on the outside. And then when we're talking about sex assigned at birth, we're talking about the genetic makeup, the material, the the genetic material of the chromosomes. We're talking about body parts that you're born with. So a lot of times when doctors determine what sex a person is, we oftentimes associate that with gender too. So when a doctor sees a penis or a vagina on a sonogram or an ultrasound, they say congratulations, it's a boy, or congratulations, it's a girl. So even before birth, we're talking about gender and sex as though they are the same thing, but they're really not. So when we're talking about sex, we're really just talking about the parts that we're born with. We're talking about XY chromosomes. We're talking about the genetic material, right?
Yeah.
And as you can see on the gender unicorn, there's female, there's male, and then there's other intersex. And that's something that we don't really talk about as much. We don't talk about people who are born with more parts, or we're talking about people that are born with a mixture of male and female genitalia. But there are a lot of people that are born with different parts, and it's not just the standard like penis and vagina. That's not something that is it's not the only thing that exists. So
And then
it's really
that can also put a lot of that can also make us think about how we think about gender and sexuality, because how you mentioned a lot of people put them in the same boat as if they were the same. But then when you think about people that are born with more than one part, or their chromosome levels, they're varying and all that stuff, then if you are just focusing, or if you do truly believe that it's either male or female, then where would you put those individuals, right? I know there is, and I don't know if this is something that you're familiar with, or you've heard about, but I know that there's a bit of disagreeing in terms of like just using the word sex versus sex assigned at birth for individuals to refer to sex in itself. What's your standing on that, or have you ever heard about that ideology of using one versus the other?
I have heard a lot of people talk about it. I think for people, it just kind of, for some people, it's a preference, like to use the word, sex assigned at birth. I think it pertains more, for a lot of people, it's more of a conversation if you're gender non-binary or gender non-conforming or trans. It's obviously more, it's talked about more versus when you're talking about cis straight people, right? So there's more of a conversation surrounding the terminology and the words that are used. I mean, I think sex assigned at birth is more, it's more encompassing, so it's more inclusive language that's used, so it's better. So you're including more people, you're not discriminating against someone. I mean, I think it's up to each person. Obviously, there's some people that prefer that language and some people that don't prefer to use the language, but I don't know that I personally have a strong stance on using one versus the other. But I get why it's a conversation for sure. What are your thoughts on it?
Um, well, honestly, I hadn't really thought about it as a conflicting thought before. And I guess that really puts into perspective my privilege in terms of like how I identify with sex and gender and all that stuff, that was never a thought. For me, I never thought of just using sex versus sex at birth as something that could be conflicting to other people up until recently. So now I think for me, it's just safer to use sex assigned at birth, even if it's a preference for the individual. But that way I make sure, like you mentioned, that I am being more inclusive rather than exclusive of anybody and their journey and how they're feeling about their journey and themselves in the present moment. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good point. And I think that, when we're talking about things like the gender unicorn, when we're talking about sexuality or sex, we have to be ever evolving. We have to be ever changing in the language that we're using and the terminology that we're using, for sure, because it's always evolving.
Yeah.
And so we need to evolve with it.
That's true. Well, continue on to physically attracted to.
Yeah, so when we're talking about the bottom half of the gender unicorn, there's physical attraction and emotional attraction. A lot of times people kind of connect the two. So when we're talking about sexual orientation, we're not just talking about people that we are romantically attracted to, but we're also talking about physical attraction. And those don't always correspond, or they don't always they don't fall on the same wavelength or the same line. So that's why they're separated here. You can be physically attracted to men and women, or people of other genders, and you could only be emotionally attracted to men, or vice versa, right? So those things don't always line up. They're not necessarily the same. And a lot of this has kind of been attributed to, and a lot of the information that's out there is largely in part to people in the asexual community. So people who don't necessarily require or need or feel a physical attraction to other people, but really have strong emotional connections with people, and that's kind of the basis for those relationships. It's something that they've contributed a lot to, and a lot of really, really fantastic information. So that's kind of the breakdown there at the bottom that you see. But that's pretty much the gender unicorn. So when we're talking about physical attraction, we're talking about the physical connection to another person. Kind of, we're talking about sex, we're talking about the romantic relationship. When we're talking about emotional attraction, we're talking about that connection that happens beyond the physical. So that's kind of the breakdown there. But it's a very cool tool. It's nice, and kind of breaks it down in a very simplistic way, kind of to help people understand who don't necessarily think about these things, or think about the differences in those.
Yeah, I think it also is a great visual tool to, like you said, understand all these different aspects that a lot of us might not even consider are part of gender and or sexuality, and how we interact with other individuals, and to understand our own, conceptions of what each of these things mean, individually versus together. Now, one of the things, and I did talk about this a little bit with Katie in one of the other videos that we did, but I want to get your input on this. And it's this, the idea of, what's the word? So the contradiction between wanting to be, needing, sorry, needing to be identified, so wanting to identify as something, but then all of these ideas and classifications also putting you in like a narrow narrative, if that makes sense. So what is your standpoint on that?
Well, it is kind of conflicting, right? So when we're talking about wanting to find a label that kind of fits and helps us to identify with other people in the world, we want something, right? Something to be able to say, hey, this is who I am, and this is a part of who I am, right? Because it's not all of who we are. But being able to say, hey, I belong to this community, and I belong to this group of people, but also then the contrary to that, or the conflicting part of that, is then when we identify as something, then people want to keep us in that box, right? And they say you can't stray from that box, you can't go out of that box. So it can be very conflicting. I think the labels, and I'm sure Katie's probably talked about this a little bit, but them being necessary but also being useless at the same time. Right? So this idea of those labels can't be the thing that constricts us, right? They're meant to be in a way that's liberating, that's kind of like, I am this person, and this is who I am world. And not having it be something that's, okay, because you identify as such, then all of these other possibilities are out of the question,
Mm-hmm.
or you can't go outside of that box because there's that the point of the labels, and I'm sorry for stuttering a little
No,
bit.
you're
The
fine.
point of the labels is to be a liberating thing, not to
Mm-hmm.
be something that's constricting. So
Mm-hmm.
I get it. I get I like, you know what I mean, that those labels are necessary, but they also shouldn't be the thing that holds us down, or
Mm-hmm.
kind of, or gives other people a reason to hold us down,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally, 100%. So while we're in the topic of labels, I thought it would be a good idea to go over the more common identities, or at least the more popular ones that are being used the most in the present day. Now, not just for ourselves, but for everybody, it's really important to keep in mind that identity, whether it be gender wise or sexual wise or however, is very broad and very colorful, and it's ever expanding. That is why anytime that you see LGBT, LGBTQ, LGBTQIA plus, there's a plus at the end because there's a lot that adds to it. But there are more common terms nowadays that I think that are used more predominantly, but I feel that some people still have a bit of confusion when it comes to using them. So that we could discuss a bit about it. So if we go um, through the just through the acronym in itself, and then we'll add a couple of extra ones. So LGBTQIA plus. So
Mm-hmm.
L, of course, is lesbian, and it's women attracted to women.
Mm-hmm.
And stop me if I say anything wrong, because um, J is gay, so men attracted to men. B
Mm-hmm.
is bisexual, so an individual that is attracted to other individuals that identify as male or female.
Mm-hmm.
LGBT is, and I don't know if this is an updated term anymore, so please correct me if I'm wrong, is transsexual.
Trans or transgender. Yeah,
Transgender, thank you.
yeah.
Trans or
There are some,
transgender.
yeah. So there are some people that do still use the word transsexual. That's a,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's more reserved for people who identify as such, right? So,
Okay.
I would never go up to someone and say, "Hey, like, you identify as such," right? We
Mm-hmm.
should never be doing that anyway.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but but when someone is talking, that it's a term that was used a while ago, and it
Mm-hmm.
was oftentimes used in a very derogatory way, or a
Mm-hmm.
way that was demeaning to other people. So
Mm-hmm.
very similarly with other words that have been used in such a way, some people kind of have taken it and kind of coined it and have
Mm-hmm.
taken the power back for that word.
Yeah.
But it is a word that can oftentimes be still used in a very derogatory way. So
Mm-hmm.
not everybody identifies as such. So
Mm-hmm.
um, the term that's used most often is transgender, or
Transgender,
trans,
got it. Mm-hmm.
trans for
And
short.
trans for sure, trans to be safe. So on that same topic, for words that have been reclaimed, the Q stands for queer. And queer,
Mm-hmm.
as far as I am aware, was a derogatory word at one point as well.
Mm-hmm. It's still used in a very
Okay.
in the same way. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's very similar. A lot of people have kind of taken the word back and
Mm-hmm.
transformed it and made it something that isn't a derogatory word.
Yeah.
But again, that's probably a term that is reserved for an individual. So if an individual
Mm-hmm.
identifies as queer and they say that you can use that terminology to describe them,
Yeah.
then that's when it's okay to be using that word. It's more a word that like people that use to describe themselves, or
Mm-hmm.
to describe their identity, um, or their orientation, and that's a term that they're kind of saying, like, this is mine, okay.
Yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
but definitely not a term that I would just go and say,
Yeah.
um, when talking about other people, right?
Yeah.
It's definitely a word that people who do not identify within the LGBTQ
Mm-hmm.
community should not be using.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, and in general, that also does bring a good point of you just shouldn't be referring to other people by their gender identity or sexuality or anything like that. Like I think it's really weird to go, but we do this a lot. Like it's still very common in the community to go, oh yes, this person, the one that is gay, this person, the one that is lesbian, this person, the one that is like we make it a thing to put their gender or sexual preference out there, but we don't go and say, oh yeah, Tom, the straight guy from like this place, or
Right.
Tom. Like, so it's a very curious thing um, that we do in conversation, but it is also a good point that we just shouldn't be referring to people based on their sexual or gender preferences or identity.
Right. I
But
think
yeah.
it kind of goes back to that conversation about labels and kind of putting
Mm-hmm.
people into boxes,
Yeah.
right? We can't reduce someone down to just their sexual orientation or their gender
Mm-hmm.
identity. Not that those things aren't important, because they are very important, especially to people who kind of fall outside of that heteronormative cisgender
Mm-hmm.
idea that we live in this world where this is the norm, right?
Yeah.
Um, so obviously it's a very important thing, but to just label someone as, okay, this person is gay or this person is a lesbian, that
Mm-hmm.
it takes away the other parts of who they are, right? So
Yeah.
there are other
Yeah.
aspects of to who a person is. So we can't just boil people down to one label,
Mm-hmm.
and use that as a way to identify them, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so then it was I intersex, and that is an up-to-date term, correct?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of going back to sex assigned at birth.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who's born with genitalia that is either male, female, or both, right? A mixture
Mm-hmm.
of the two, or born with X chromosome and having a penis, or born with a XY chromosome and having a vagina. So kind of a mixture of different
Yeah.
um, chromosomes or genitalia. Correct.
Mm-hmm. And then the last one is A, which is asexual, which you did already touch upon. Um, now, what is so we have asexual, and you define that a little bit, but we also have aromantic. Could you
Mm-hmm.
define aromantic a little bit more for people?
So when we're talking about asexual, we're talking about the physical connection, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the physical desire. And I will be honest, I'm not too familiar with aromantic.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have a whole lot of information,
Mm-hmm.
and I probably could, but when we're talking about aromantic, we're talking about someone who, I guess. I guess they're the way that they. And I'll be honest with you. I'm not sure. I don't want to say
No,
something that I'm not educated on, right? So I
yeah.
don't want to give that
Mm-hmm.
terminology or that definition when I'm not
Mm-hmm.
I'm not super familiar. What I can say though is the transstudent.org website. They have a whole list of different terms and
Yes.
definitions for those terms, and
Yeah.
I'm almost 100% sure that aromantic is probably on there. So
Mm-hmm.
definitely check that website out if you want to get more information
Yeah.
about terminology. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that. I don't want to
No,
speak
you're
to
fine.
something I'm not educated
No,
about.
you're really fine. So I do know a little bit about aromanticism, and just again, there's more to it. There's more to a lot of these things. At its most basic, aromanticism is somebody that, so when we spoke about sex and then we spoke about emotional feelings, so being emotionally connected to somebody else. So somebody that is aromantic will not feel romantic feelings towards any specific gender or sexual identity. Um, some of them, and that in itself is a scale. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Holly. So Holly said aromantic, little or no romantic attraction to other. Yeah. So, um, so yeah. So that aromanticism in itself is a scale. So some people feel some romantic feelings towards others, and while others don't. And some people can feel that they can have an emotional connection, even if it's not romantic to others, while others don't. So that's just a little bit of aromantic. And she shared a link with us. So for anybody watching, Holly, our awesome, beautiful coworker Holly shared a link for more facts about aromanticism for anybody that's interested. So thank you so much, girl. Um, so here's another term, and I think a lot of people even now still have some trouble with this one, and it's pansexual and the difference between being pansexual and bisexual.
Yeah, so when we're talking about pansexual, we're talking about people who are romantically attracted, physically attracted to the person for who they are rather than the body parts that they
Mm-hmm.
are born with, right? So I think for some people um, who identify as bisexual, they may or may not be attracted to people that kind of fall outside of the binary of
Mm-hmm.
male female, right? So
Yeah.
I think pansexual is a term that came up because it's more inclusive in the sense for like people who identify
Mm-hmm.
as gender nonconforming or gender non-binary, to kind of who kind of fall outside of that spectrum of the binary of male and female.
Yeah.
So it's more of an attraction for the person for who they are rather than the the body parts that they were born with.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Um, demisexual.
Mm.
Mm.
Yep. Yep. So I, yeah, you got me there. I'm not familiar with
so
demisexual.
so demisexual, from what I understand, and Holly, if you want to get us on this one, girl, you're more than welcome to again. But from what I understand for demisexual is somebody that does not feel sexual attraction unless there is a romantic attraction already set up. So, mm, gender non-binary.
So gender non-binary, similar to trans, in the sense that the person does not identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth, right? So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times, like I said, there's that connection of if you're born with a penis and you are told that, people say that you're a boy. If you're born with a vagina, then they say that you're a girl.
Yeah.
So people that kind of don't really feel like they align with that assigned at birth, the gender assigned at birth,
Mm-hmm.
would kind of fall into gender nonconforming or gender non-binary. They don't fit into the binary of what we say is male or like who we say is male or who we say is female. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it's someone who some people who identify as trans also identify as gender nonconforming. Some people who identify as gender nonconforming don't necessarily identify as trans. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a little bit of a difference, but for a lot of people, it's basically the sex that you were born does not
Yes.
line up with the gender that you identify with, and that can look different for different people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. So Holly helped us out, and she said individuals who identify as demisexuals often say that they must have an emotional connection with someone in order to experience sexual attraction. There we go. Thank you, Holly, for the rescue. Holly to the rescue all the time. Okay, so last terminology for now, gender fluid.
Okay, so gender fluid, someone who is kind of goes in between male female as far as
Mm,
like gender. There's more of a fluidity.
mm,
So for some people it's very concrete, so it kind of stays very similar or stays kind of within a certain range. For
mm-hmm,
someone who's gender fluid, it fluctuates, so it's more fluid. It's something that can be ever changing.
mm-hmm.
um, so one day they might identify as more masculine or more male, and then other days they might identify as more feminine or more female or somewhere in between.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much. So, just to wrap up things a little bit, I think what is your thoughts on the experience, the human experience of gender and sexuality that is ever evolving, ever so changing, ever so colorful, and ever so different for everybody?
What are my thoughts? Oh, that's a
Yeah.
big question. um, I think in general, like if I have to say anything, I think I'm glad that I'm living in the time that I am, because I think that we're having conversations that we didn't really
Yeah.
have before. We are
Yeah.
open to different possibilities, and the beauty that is humanity is that like we are all so different. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I like that I'm getting to experience that in the world,
Mm-hmm.
like that shift of being able to just be who you are and not necessarily be judged for that, or be targeted for that. I know that there's
Yeah.
still a lot of violence in the world, and there's still a lot of growth that we need to make in those areas. But I like that I'm, a part of history that is starting to see some of those changes,
Yeah.
which is really
Yeah.
fantastic.
That's awesome. And if what would be a message that you would say to somebody that might be struggling with their own gender identity or sexual identity?
There's so much. um, I think I think the biggest thing is that there is a world of support out there. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Whether you have support in your own family unit or in the people around you, like if that's not something that you have, there are people out there that understand. There are people out there that will be supportive, that will be helpful, that can help you through
Mm-hmm.
um, discovering like who you are and what that means for you. So like, don't give up. Like, don't give up searching for those communities, or trying to find those people that you can connect with, because
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot out there.
Awesome. And I think on that same token, gender and sexuality is just an aspect of yourself. And we know I know we talked about this a little bit overall of like, it's not your entirety. It's not the entirety of a person. Person is multifaceted. How they identify is just one aspect of who they are. It's not their entire being.
Mm-hmm.
And with that comes the idea that, because times are more accepting now, because times are changing, it's okay if you're finding yourself maybe as an adult, or even, or somebody mature, of a mature age, and you start questioning these things, or you start questioning yourself, or you start exploring things about yourself that you didn't before, because now it is a much more safe environment to do so, and it's totally okay to be doing that, even if you're 60 or 70 or 50 or 40. There is no age in which you need to start in order to consider yourself another identity, I guess. Although it's something that many people experience at a younger age, it is fair and it's totally normal and okay if it's something that you're just exploring at a later age as well. Um, and like Ashton said, there's a lot of support now out there and a lot of people that care and that are gonna be there for you. So, and at the very least, Sark is yeah, there for you. So we
Yeah,
try
for
to be
sure.
very supportive of our community. So, but yeah. So thank you so much to everybody that is joining us. Thank you so much to Ashton for giving me a little bit of his time, even though I like contacted him very last minute, but he was also kind to
No
help me with this.
problem.
But yeah, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to contact us. For anybody interested in the LGBTQI plus drop-in center, I put a link on the first post. I think I'm gonna put a link on this one after it's done, for the actual event page where we're gonna keep you guys updated just on that one. Um, and yeah, anything else? Sark is still here and working and still serving our community. So thank you so much. Thank you guys so much for watching and joining us. And hopefully you'll join us on the couple of other videos that are going to be coming in the upcoming weeks with different people from Sark. Awesome. So yeah, thank you so much, guys. Have a great night. Stay safe. And thank you so much, Ashton.
Thank you for having me. Have a good
Bye,
night.
guys. Good night.
Bye.